Welcome everyone to episode 130 and the third anniversary episode of EDH Commander Challenge. I'm your host, BT. First of all, I want to say cheers to each and every one of you out there. Whether you're a subscriber, family member, viewer, Twitter follower, patron, pledgehammer, playgroup member, these last 3 years have been an absolute blast, and I'm truly blessed to have your support. Thank you for being on this awesome ride with us as our EDHCC family continues to grow. In honor of it, prepare yourselves for an epic 4-player matchup right here, right now. Let's get to those opening hands. First, in this corner, with an opening hand of a Plains, Mountain, Forest, Stomping Ground, Verdant Catacombs, Sylvan Library, Avacyn Angel of Hope, and his Naya General Samut Voice of Dissent. He is the John Moxley of our playgroup, the fearless Sir Armen. Next, in this corner, with an opening hand of 2 Mountains, Runaway Steamkin, Seasoned Pyromancer, Impact Tremors, Gamble, Milliken, and his mono-red general Zada Hedron Grinder. He is the newest member of the EDHCC family. Please welcome David. Next up, in this corner, with an opening hand of a Forest, Yavimaya Coast, Awakening Zone, Kadama's Reach, Frozen Grip, Wild Growth, Green Warden of Murasa, and his Simic General, Eutropia the Twice Favored. He is the unpredictable Gemi. And finally, in this corner, with an opening hand of Marsh Flats, Bloodstained Mire, Demir's Signet, Chaos Warp, Wheel of Fortune, Avatar of Woe, Frantic Search, and his Grixis commander, Mairsil the Pretender. He is formerly our playgroup's Avenger, now renamed Mr. Fetchland. He is Josh. Jimmy won the dice roll to start us off, so let's begin this incredible card fight. For their first turns, Jimmy plays a Forest and casts Wild Growth on it. Josh plays Cavern of Souls, naming wizards. David plays a Mountain and casts Gamble. This allows him to tutor a card from his deck to his hand, and then he discards a card. And finally, Armen plays a tapped Stomping Ground. Jimmy plays Yavimaya Coast and keeps his ramp plan going with Kadama's Reach. This lets him put an island from his deck into play tapped, and a forest to his hand before passing. Josh plays and sacks a Bloodstained Mire, paying 1 life to put a Badlands from his deck into play. Then he casts Demir's Signet and passes. David plays a Mountain and casts Milliken and passes. Armen plays a Plains and casts Sylvan Library and passes. Jimmy plays a Forest and casts his general Eutropia and passes. Josh keeps his fetch land trend going, playing and sacking Marsh Flats, paying a life to get Underground Sea from his deck into play. Then he casts his general, Mairsil. With its ETB, he exiles Avatar of Woe with a cage counter and copies its ability before passing. David plays a Mountain and taps Millikin to add a mana and mill himself for 1. Then he casts Runaway Steamkin, followed by Impact Tremors, which puts a +1/+1 counter on the Steamkin before he passes. Armen pays 8 life to keep his extra 2 cards from the Sylvan library. He then plays a Forest and casts Rhythm of the Wild and passes. For Gemi's turn, he plays Reliquary Tower and casts Awakening Zone. This triggers his general, placing a +1/+1 counter on it and giving it flying until end of turn. Then he casts Crozen Grip and uses it to destroy Armen's library. Then he moves into combat and attacks Armen with Eutropia for 3 damage and passes. Josh simply draws for his turn and passes. For David's turn, he casts Mana Crypt, then taps Millikin to gain a new mana and mill himself for 1. Then he casts Seasoned Pyromancer. This deals 1 damage to each of his opponents thanks to his Impact Tremors. Then with its ETB trigger, he discards 2 cards to draw 2 cards. As both discarded cards are non-land cards, he gets to make 2 1/1 elemental tokens. This caused the Impact Tremors to deal 2 more damage to his opponents and places another counter on his Steamkin. Then he moves into combat and attacks Armen with his Steamkin for 3 damage before passing. During his end step, Josh casts Frantic Search to draw 2, discard 2, and untap 3 lands. For Armen's turn, he casts Aura Shards and then plays a tapped Jungle Shrine, passing. During his upkeep, Gemi scores a 0/1 Eldrazi spawn token off his zone. He sacks it and taps out to cast the epic Nyxbloom Ancient. Thanks to his general's trigger, he places a +1/+1 counter on it and passes. However, during his end step, Josh says a simple but loud "No!" and taps his Mairsil to use his Avatar of Woe's ability to destroy the Ancient. Then he also casts Chaos Warp on Impact Tremors. The card is then shuffled into David's deck, and then his top card afterwards is revealed to be Iron Mirror, which then goes into play. Earning his new nickname of Mr. Fetchland, Josh plays and sacks Flooded Strand, paying 1 life to place Volcanic Island from his deck into play. Then he casts Gilded Lotus, followed by Crystal Shard, and passes. David takes no damage from his Mana Crypt roll during his upkeep. Then he casts Goblin Cherugion. This places a 3rd counter on his Steamkin. He then removes the counters from the Steamkin to gain 3 red mana and casts his general, Zada. Then that puts a counter on his Steamkin. He then casts Fiery Gambit on Zada, which allows Dave to copy the spell for each of his creatures on the field thanks to Zada's effect. With said effect on the stack, Josh taps his Mairsil to kill Zada. After Zada dies, and to shortcut this next part for you, sadly David fails his flips. although he did have a moment where he won 2 flips, but failed the 3rd one to cash in big. He then moves into combat and attacks Josh with his Steamkin and Elemental tokens for 4 damage, before passing. Armen plays a mountain and passes. During his upkeep, Gemi gets another Eldrazi token off his zone. He sacks it and pays 5 mana more to cast Green Warden of Marasa. He uses it to take his Ancient from his graveyard back to his hand. Then he takes the damage to tap his Coast for a green to cast Elvish Mystic and passes. Josh casts Penman's Aura and enchants Mairsil with it. Then he casts Buried Alive, placing Aetherling, Skyship Stalker, and Tree of Perdition from his deck into his graveyard, and passes. David once again takes no damage from his Crypt roll during his upkeep. He then moves into combat and mysteriously attacks Josh with his Pyromancer. Josh easily blocks him with Mairsil, and after the Pyromancer dies, David simply passes. During the end step, Armen flashes in his general, Samut. With his Rhythm trigger, Samut gets a +1/+1 counter, and with his Aura Shards trigger, he blows up Gemi's zone. For Armen's turn itself, he plays Mana Confluence and casts Sigarda. With his Rhythm trigger, she gets a +1/+1 counter, and with his Aura Shards trigger, he destroys Josh's Aura. In response, Josh taps Mairsil to kill Samut, and uses the Aura to untap it. Then he taps it again to kill Eutropia, and untaps Mairsil again before the Aura is finally destroyed, and Armen passes. For Gemi's turn, he casts both Ravenous Slime and Cold-Eyed Selkie. Then he moves into combat and attacks David with his Warden. David declares no blocks and takes 5 damage before Gemi passes. During his end step, Josh taps Mairsil to kill David's Steamkin. This places 2 +1/+1 counters on Gemi's slime. Then Josh uses his Crystal Shard to bounce his general back to his hand. For Josh's turn, he recasts his general, and with its ETB, exiles Aetherling with a cage counter on it to assimilate its abilities. Then he casts Wheel of Fortune. In response, Armen casts Swords to Plowshares, paying 1 life to his Confluence to exile Mairsil. But Josh uses assimilated Aetherling's ability to exile it until the end of the turn. Then the wheel resolves, and everyone discards their hand and draws a fresh new 7 cards. Then Josh plays Sulphur Falls and passes. During his end step, David exiles his Pyromancer to make 2 more Elemental tokens, and Josh's general returns to the field, and with its ETB, this time exiles Tree of Perdition with a cage counter. During his upkeep, David finally takes 3 damage from his Crypt roll. Then he casts Goblin Dark Dwellers. With its ETB trigger, he flashes back Gamble from his graveyard for free, and tutors another card from his deck to his hand, and discards a card before passing. Armen plays a forest and casts Vivian, Champion of the Wilds. He uses her +1 to give Zada Vigilance and Reach for the turn, and then he moves into combat and attacks Josh with her for 6 damage, and passes. Gemi starts his turn by playing Mossword Bridge tapped. This lets him also hide away a card. Then he casts Herald of the Pantheon and recasts his general Eutropia. Then he moves into combat and attacks David with his Warden again. David once again declares no blocks and takes 5 damage before Gemi passes. Before the end step, however, Josh taps Mairsil to kill Gemi's slime. At which point, Armen flashes in Llanowar Elves. With his Rhythm trigger, it gets a +1/+1 counter, and with his Aura Shards trigger, he destroys the Crystal Shard. In response, Josh tries to use the shard to bounce Mairsil. In response to that, so many in responses this game, huh? Armen flashes in Elvish Mystic. It gets a counter from the Rhythm, and with the Aura Shards trigger, destroys the Gilded Lotus. And he also casts Path to Exile to exile Mairsil. Armen also loses 1 life to his Confluence, while Josh nets a free mountain from his deck into play tapped as a result of the Path to Exile. Josh plays Academy Ruins and recasts Mairsil, and exiles Gilded Lotus with a cage counter this time, and passes. David takes no damage off his Crypt roll during his upkeep. Next, he casts the card he gambled for last turn, Mana Geyser. This lets him gain 17 red mana in the process. Next, he uses 6 of it to recast Zada. Next, he casts Renegade Tactics on Zada. As it copies a spell for each creature he controls, he draws 9 new cards. Next, he casts Ruby Medallion, making his red spells cost less. Followed by Dockside Extortionist, making some treasure tokens. Then he casts Goblin Instigator, making a 1/1 Goblin token. Next up, he casts Hordling Outburst, making 3 more Goblin tokens. Next, he casts Stun, targeting Zada, which again copies the spell for each creature on David's field, allowing him to draw another 15 cards. He further adds to his mana supply by tapping his Mirror and Millikin, which also mills him for 1. And then he casts Beetleback Chief, making 2 more goblins. Next, he recasts the Impact Tremors that was shuffled into his deck earlier that he redrew. Then David says, "Let the life total drop begin." He casts Young Pyromancer, and with his Tremors deals 1 damage to each of his opponents. Then he casts Battle Hymn to gain red mana for each creature he controls. He gains an Elemental token, 19 red mana, and then deals another damage to his opponents via his Tremors. Next up, he casts Crimson Wisps, targeting Zada, gaining another Elemental token, dealing 1 damage to his opponents via his Tremors, giving all of his creatures haste thanks to the Zada spell copies, and draws another 20 cards. What is happening right now? Next, he casts Perforos, God of the Forge, which combined with Impact Tremors deals 3 damage to each opponent for each creature that comes into play now. As Perforos is a creature when it comes in thanks to his devotion, Tremors deals 1 damage to David's opponents. Next he casts Siege Gang Commander, who comes in with 3 more Goblin tokens. This deals 12 damage to David's opponents. Followed by Mog War Marshal, who comes in with another Goblin token. This deals 6 damage to everyone else again, and with that, Armen is eliminated. Next, David casts Krenko's Command, making 2 more Goblins, and dealing the rest of the table 6 more damage. This in turn eliminates Josh from the game as well. And finally, David casts Empty the Warrens, which has Storm, and this being David's 18th spell cast from his hand this turn, he gets to make 36 more Goblins, dealing poor Gemi over 100 damage to eliminate him and take the most amazing victory I have ever seen. Aside from blowing up a few permanents with his awesome aura shards, Armen didn't get to do much this game, unfortunately. He suffered a lot of spot removal and didn't draw any mana boosters until late in the game, which by then his life total and field had taken a beating. Josh's Mairsil deck was well built, and in a 1v1 situation, I'm convinced he can take anybody on. However, considering he had an Avatar of Woe copied into it this game, not to mention Aetherling, and he was constantly picking off creatures one by one, he made himself into a massive target in the process and was backed into a corner for the last half of the game. Gemi had a solid field at times, but not many enchantments to show off what his Eutropia could do. And it didn't help matters that his best creatures either couldn't be used or got flat out killed thanks to Mairsil's Avatar of Woe effect in play. David proved that while red may be considered to be the weakest color in EDH, that with the right setup it can walk over any and all decks. Zada is one of the best red generals I've ever seen. In his last turn, he played 18 spells from his hand and drew over 1/3 of the cards in his deck. He also had over 50 creatures in play and dealt more than enough damage to beat a player 3 times over. Seriously, Dave got the coolest win I have ever recorded on this show. Agree with our picks? Let us know in the comments down below. And if you enjoy our content, consider becoming a patron. I'll give you access to some sweet bonuses while helping out the channel at the same time. Special thanks to Gemi, our newest patron pledgehammer, as well as our play group, and to all of you who have supported the channel the last 3 years. Cheers to you all once again, and let's continue to make more fun memories. Thanks for watching, guys. Hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you're a fan of EDH gameplay and you like whether it be 1v1 or multiplayer and you want to be part of the ever-growing Commander Challenge family, just make sure you smash the subscribe button and notification bell down below. We do weekly videos. Don't forget as well to like, comment, share our videos, but most importantly, enjoy them. On behalf of all of our members here, I'm your host, BT. Feel free to check out all of the videos in the channel, join our game, it's now your turn. Cheers!